Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Andrew Gaffney. I'm Editorial Director with Demand Gen Report. Really glad you could join us today. We're going to be presenting some results from our annual ABM study today. Nearly 90+% of the readers and marketers that I talk to are doing some level of ABM. We've really seen the conversation and the results around our annual study shift from whether or not people are doing ABM really to a level of sophistication and how they're trying to blend what they're doing with ABM across some of their acquisition strategies. So we're going to spend some time sharing some of the results, and then I've got a great guest speaker that's going to join me in analyzing some of those results and looking at some ways ABM is being applied and how companies are applying it across their different marketing strategies more broadly. Quick reminder, our session today is being brought to you by Demand Gen Report. I encourage all of you to take advantage of the great content. You can get a free subscription on our website at demandgenreport.com. It'll also give you access to the research and surveys like this one that we're analyzing today. Also, I'd encourage you to check us out on social media. We've got great active groups and conversations going on Twitter and LinkedIn, and we'll be following and monitoring those today. So feel free to post and share any of the results that you see today, and we'll be reposting and sharing those as well. Quick mention, in addition to our online educational content, we also have our physical event. Our big event is in February 24th to the 26th in Scottsdale. We have a whole track on ABM as well as Demand Gen and 6 full tracks. So some lucky registrants from today's session will actually be winning free passes to that, so keep an eye out for that. And also check out our community of B2BM experts where you can ask questions of peers and find out what some of your colleagues and peers are talking about out in the market. We'll spend about 30, 40 minutes going through the results from our study. When I mentioned, I'll be joined by a special guest who will be helping me look at those results and breaking them down about what it looks like for what marketers are actually doing out in the market and what they're going to be doing going forward. If you have questions you'd like to ask about the results or about some of the examples we're sharing, go ahead and type it into the Q&A tab. We'll spend about 10 or 15 minutes going through as many questions as we can. And if we don't get to your question, we'll try to follow up with you directly. Also, there'll be access to go and download the report on this, as well as some related resources within the On24 dashboard, and you can also monitor social media there as well. So I mentioned I'm going to be joined by guest John Daring, is somebody that I've had the pleasure to work with closely over the last few years. John is one of the real experts in the market as I'm concerned around ABM and B2B marketing. He's helped me analyze some of our surveys throughout the year, and somebody that I turn to for just trends and how they're being applied across the market. John is Senior Director of ABM Technology and Strategy at Demandbase, where he develops the strategy for marketing technologies to fulfill Demandbase's vision for ABM. Over the past decade, John has refined his marketing expertise while holding positions in marketing and sales leadership with Salesforce, Strongview Systems, Spoke, and other companies. John, thanks for joining me again today. Really looking forward to diving in.
Always a pleasure, Andrew.
All right, so let's get into it. That we know, as I mentioned, I think we're at a point now where ABM has reached a certain maturity. A lot more B2B companies or brands are applying it. I think what we're seeing, the questions and the go forward is, what's the best way to do it? How do I maybe improve what I've done so far? So one of the first things we looked at, what are some of the challenges and priorities companies have seen as they've advanced down the ABM path? Biggest ABM-related challenges you see here is it's still sales and marketing alignment. I mean, that's sort of a evergreen topic. We've seen that as long as we've been covering it. I think the level of sales enablement, sales and marketing alignment, the conversation is changing a little bit. It's not whether or not that they get along, or whether it's really a lot more intricate of how they're working together, what kind of data they're using. So I think the good news is, while it's still a challenge, you'll see later on in some of the results that it's also clearly been one of the real payoffs of ABM is that that's definitely shown improvement. It's getting more strategic. We see also that it's still an ongoing challenge of proving ROI and attribution. ABM tends to be a bigger, more focused investment for companies as they look at sort of a more micro-targeted approach. So it's pretty soon after where the sales team or the executive team starts to say, okay, well, you guys spent that or you did that, how did it work? So we're definitely seeing a continued push there, and we'll share some examples and thoughts around that. Obviously, as companies get more targeted personalization, this continues to be a goal and a challenge, but we'll share some thoughts around how that's being addressed. And then, obviously, to do personalization or to be more contextual with your audience, content continues to be one of the key ways to do that. So I think it's something that we're seeing brands prioritize, but also struggle with to a certain extent. And then this last one about identifying, predicting accounts. We're seeing, again, huge interest and huge application. I think a pretty big competitive differentiation, too, of companies that are really using technologies like intent, using it at different areas of their sales and marketing funnels and different parts of their strategy. The other thing I want to talk about today, one of the things that really jumped out this year was we saw more than 10% of readers said that they're actually overwhelmed by technology stack choices. So seeing that as kind of a shift in that technology was viewed as a real sort of enabler. Everybody was trying to build out their tech stacks and trying to add any cool, new, innovative thing. I think there's a lot more sort of rationalization where B2B organizations and teams are really trying to understand what fits well, what do I really need to achieve my business goals. So, John, I wanted to bring you in here, starting sort of on the right side in the big top challenges I looked at. Any of those surprise you? What were your thoughts there?
No, actually, I think they're really in line with what I'm seeing in the market, which is no surprise that we're seeing them in the survey results. But I spend a lot of my time working with prospects and customers, kind of talking through that one on the far right, the intent concept, and how they can adopt that into their existing models. Because I think we all get the idea of if we can figure out what accounts are in market, that can be really valuable insights. But then how does that translate into all the different areas in marketing that we're executing, whether that's identifying those accounts and prioritizing them, or taking us into action, or even measuring the results. And I think as we think about technologies to help us do that, that's where a lot of marketers are probably just saying, I just got this ABM thing going, now I have to think about another technology. And this kind of, it can be a little bit evolving as we see there. So, I would say to those marketers maybe who are feeling that on the line, it's okay. We've all been there. And what's key is I think that we develop a strategy for how we're going to approach that. So, it's great to see a lot of marketers are interested in that and wanting to do it. The next step is that how, as you were saying, Andrew, because I think a lot more of the how for ABM has come out and is beginning to be used. Now it's how do we begin to use more of this data, more of this intelligence to make our account-based marketing efforts more effective.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think the brands and teams that I'm seeing do it really well. They don't look at technologies or even ABM as a completely siloed, different approach, that they're really trying to look at some of the technologies they have currently, if they can be integrated in some of their efforts, but just trying to be much smarter and sort of look at it from a holistic view. So the next thing I want to look at, we asked what technologies that they currently are using, planning to use to support their ABM strategy. I realize there's a lot here to grasp in terms of looking at these. Some of the ones on the left that's the currently using, so not a huge surprise. CRM's a critical part of it, very big chunk of looking at marketing automation. Measurement and reporting capabilities are already a big part. We see things like campaign execution and organizational tools, more than 60% are currently using. And then some of it gets down to more of a tactical. You see almost half that are currently using web and content personalization tools, which is aligned with we talked about earlier on the priorities side. And then 48% looking at data, and you're currently using data and augmentation tools. I think data is a key part that you talked about already, John. And I'd want to ask you to add to that. As we slide to the right, though, I think it's interesting. It's the same set of some answers that they could have picked, but when we broke it down differently in planning to use, and you see the top ones they're planning to add, web and content personalization was actually the top one for planned use, and then insights and intelligence tools was next. So again, that goes back for me to intent, some of the things that really help you get smarter about the market. Predictive, kind of a similar category there. Data and augmentation tools, which is already fairly highly in use, but a lot of planned use there as well. Intent, something you touched on earlier. Again, some of that gets some carryover crossover between some of these categories, but account-based advertising, pretty significant spike there, and then lead to account matching, which is something that we see at kind of a fundamental level, companies realizing they need. A lot here, John, but I wanted to ask you a couple of things to your perspective on. One is when we look at sort of the left side of marketing automation, very high penetration, a lot of companies are already using that. Thoughts on how that gets blended well into sort of an ABM approach, and then what other else your perspectives on sort of the current use and planned use?
Yeah, so I think, one of the things I see here, Andrew, in this data is on our far left, we have some of our more traditional systems that were in play, in use across almost any business, but before ABM really took off, right? So, everybody had a CRM system and a marketing automation and some way to kind of measure and report their success at some level. As we've gotten more refined with our ABM strategy, this is where orchestration tools and personalization really come into play. And it's interesting to see, I'm glad to see data and augmentation tools on there, but it's interesting to see it kind of at the lower end of the scale there, in both the usage but also the planned use, because there's the old adage, bad data in gives you bad data out, and whether we're defining our target accounts or we're trying to go and target them and make them aware of who we are or even measure our performance, the quality of the data that we have on hand can be a significant impact on the performance of any of those activities. So when I think about all of these elements, what I really start to see is the need for the ability, or the need of the ability for all of this data to be used across a multitude of different systems, right? Today you have an ABM category, and that means there's different technologies there to use, which again, can lead to that kind of, what do I use? I'm not quite sure what to do. But it also means that in this early stage of the category, there are many different innovators out there doing things. So you have a lot of different point solutions. And so being able to bring those together and utilize those data elements across the different systems is where you start to create that more unified experience, and where marketers who are trying to create that unified customer buying journey experience are really playing. And with that, Demandbase has actually been kind of thinking about that for many, many years, but earlier this year made an announcement around our ecosystem. And so earlier this year, with that idea of a combined, unified either platform or set of technologies that are working together, we launched our Demandbase ecosystem, our ABM ecosystem, around our technology partners. So we saw a lot of responses, hey, we want to either use or adopt personalization, or we need to get better ideas around our content marketing, or we need to create better sales and marketing alignment. Those are some of the really key areas that you find marketers have to focus on when they start to evolve and mature their ABM strategy. So we wanted to set out and make it easy for not only our marketers, but the downstream users, their customers, the sales team, to get the same value that they're getting, especially when we're thinking about like intent data, right? How do we not only use that in a single system, but translate that to other areas where we're measuring content or looking at what's going on our website, or providing intelligence to sales so they can be more effective in their deals. And that was really the genesis of the Demandbase ABM ecosystem. But as we saw, many, many marketers were saying, I'm just kind of overloaded, or I don't know where to start. And so certainly this is kind of a good place to start, right? It'd be great to say, oh, Demandbase works with these companies, let's go look at them. But I think what's really important instead of that approach is thinking about what are those challenges that we saw, say, on the first slide, or that a business is facing, and where do we find technology to address those? In pops, and this is a bit of a spoiler alert, but the ABM Tech Stack Evaluator. So at the time you're viewing this webinar today, this isn't quite in the market, quote unquote, yet, but it will be in the next several days, and then in the next several weeks you're going to be hearing a lot more about this from Demandbase. But what this really is designed to be is a resource to help you answer some of those questions about what are the challenges I'm facing related to my ABM strategy, and what kind of technologies can solve those for me or help me address those? So we've built this to make it kind of simple and easy and to go through that process. And then ultimately what you'll do is say, I have this type of challenge, and you'll be able to get a report that kind of guides you on the path to evaluating the right technologies that are best for your business. It's really simple to do. It's basically 7 different areas where you're going to talk, input some of the information or the challenges you're facing to get that report. So, whether it's looking at your target accounts or how you're generating awareness within those target accounts, to actually identifying and reaching that buying team, that committee in the account, how you're going to measure engagement with those accounts, and how you're going to think about your content marketing strategies and measuring those in your ABM strategy, to launching the campaigns and measuring how all of this is working together. You just go through these 7 quick questions, and what you'll get out of the end is that customized report. So again, that customized report is going to help you focus on technologies that are going to solve those challenges that you're currently facing, as well as provide you some insight into some of the nuances of those different subcategories, right? Not just look at this technology, but here are the different things that you're going to find when you're looking at these different technologies so that you can understand going in, what are the nuances that are going to be relevant for my business so I can ask the right questions when I'm talking to those vendors. And then with that report, you're also going to get some benchmarks about how others who have taken this assessment are ranking their biggest challenges, so you kind of know where you stand, as well as some additional resources to kind of take it to the next step, such as some ideas for how to use tech, a vendor checklist, some resources that you can use to help scale that effort if you need to. So some really great ways as you're thinking about adopting technology to solve some of these challenges that you can get kind of a cheat sheet, if you will, or a quick report about where you should be focusing your time. Because what we really need to be doing is not spending too much time thinking about all these technology decisions. We need to get in and understand, how are we going to engage the accounts that are most relevant to our business. And so again, it's meant to help you get on the path to doing that and not spend as much time thinking about the technologies that you should be investing in.
Awesome. So I saw one of the first elements of the evaluator, John, was around account selection, and that's one of the ongoing conversations that I have that people struggle with when they're sort of first starting their ABM journeys. It's also something that I think it's just an ongoing challenge of, are we focusing on the right accounts? Should we be looking at more? Are we in the right sectors? So I think that's one of the areas within our study that we constantly look at and had some interesting results again this year. So when we ask, readers or to survey respondents to describe their approach to deciding which accounts to include, almost half said they have a strong handle on their ideal customer profile, ICP, but have room to improve. More than a third said sales and marketing are aligned on their ideal customer profile and feel they already have strong coverage. So, significant amount that don't. 33% said we're still trying to define and strengthen our grasp of their ICP. So I think, again, different categorizations, definitions here, but I think as a whole you can see that there's few that sort of feel like they really have this key part of an ABM strategy nailed. 31% said they can identify their ICP using standard firmographics and technographics. I think that's probably a little high from what we've seen, anecdotally talk to people. Only a quarter said that they're using intent data tools to identify and predict new accounts. So I think that really represents a big opportunity. You touched on that earlier, John, but anything else jump out at you, sort of how people were defining this key phase of ABM?
I think when I see that 48% have a good handle, but there's always room to improve. I think about how we have grown our target account list and its effectiveness over the years, starting with kind of looking at data in our CRM, then applying a predictive model on top of that, which grew our opportunity generation rate by over 200%. And then when we layered intent on top of that to really identify which accounts were in market, it grew our opportunity generation rate by another 157%. So we're even in the process of using intent to then subdivide different tiers of our target accounts and things like that now. So I do think it's a journey, it's a path we go on, and there's no final destination for our target account list. So I'm really glad to see that nearly half have kind of grasped that journey. The others maybe are kind of thinking, well, we have a good idea, but we're still trying to lock it down, or maybe there's new markets arising that are causing us to pivot, and so forth. So it's great to see that kind of a healthy mix here. What we'd really love to see is more intent going into that, because those are the accounts where we're going to either, as you noted, be able to identify net new ones, right? Maybe they're not in our CRM system, and that can help us identify those, but also shift and prioritize those that we are aware of for marketing now, because we probably don't have budget to go after every account on our target account list. So how do we pick the right ones to get the most bang for our marketing dollar? And that's really where intent comes into the picture. So I think if we looked at this data 2 years ago, it would have been entirely different than what we're seeing now. And I think we're really starting to see that adoption trend and moving, as we said earlier, into the how phase.
I think it's interesting. I've always considered you guys sort of the ultimate test case. You were the first leading ABM vendor, so companies naturally turn to you and say, well, what do you do? So you guys had the Demandbase 3000 was at the start. I mean, you've seen not only the opportunities expand, but also the opportunity rate and conversion rate expand by taking that approach, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And we even, our original ICP was only 1,500 accounts. Predictive got us to 3,000, and then using intent and prescriptive, it bumped us up to 4,000. And, that number continues to kind of inch up a little bit as our company grows and our sales teams grow and things like that, because we have to kind of make sure we resource plan our target account list against the size of our sales force, against our bookings goals for the company and things like that. So, being able to identify those new accounts that are in market is highly important to us to make sure we're optimizing our efforts and our marketing spend as we can just continue to ever increase the size of the target account list.
Yep, no, that's an interesting point to also make sure it aligns with resources and goals. So the one to switch to that we asked a little more specifically was, what data do you use or plan to use to help build and formulate your targeted account list for ABM? So that was sort of defining how they looked at their approach to getting their ABM list, but when we specifically asked how it happened, what they used. The blue is currently using, the more brown tan is planning to use. So I guess not a surprise, but the biggest one currently uses just sales team selected. It's sort of the oldest approach of, okay, well, our sales team thinks this is our best account, so that that drives us. But even in the blue you see in the middle there, more than half say they're using behavioral intent signals, which we found is a really good positive. Some predictive in there, and then a large percentages are using firmographics, so making sure they're going after sort of the right kinds of companies, and then pretty big spikes in technographics. In terms of plan to use, pretty high jumps in both intent, behavioral intent, and predictive. So I think, John, I would see it as, again, when we look at the maturity of ABM, companies are going to go beyond just sort of that traditional approach of, well, our sales team has picked the list and we're going to go ahead and market to them and hope for the best. They're really starting to use more intelligence on identifying new opportunities, companies that are acting and behaving a certain way. Anything else jump out at you around this in terms of current or planned use?
Yeah, I see that 79% for sales teams selected, and I think about that sales and marketing alignment challenge. It's really hard for a marketer to come in and just tell sales what accounts they should be going after. Even if we have predictive and intent data and all these things that tell us that, we still need buy-in from them to go forward. And part of our target account list processing here at Demandbase is we use all of that data, but then we allow our sales team to do a little scrubbing, so that they're bought in and they can kind of, maybe take 10 or 15 accounts that are off the list that they think are bad and put on their own. So I think that part is still really important, and I would put a guess out there that this 79% is probably some of those companies maybe a little bit in the earlier stage who are saying, okay, maybe it's easier to take their list and kind of run with it, and let's go after it. At least we're supporting what they need to do. And then we can start to measure baselines for how the strategy is working and think about how to improve the target account list, and whether that's bringing in technographics. But, not every company is selling technology to other companies and integrating technologies, so that may not be as big of a factor, which is why we see that, I think, 41% there. But I think then layering in those behavioral signals, intent signals on top of the sales team's list, or looking at other companies that are showing those that maybe the sales team isn't prioritizing, is really where we can start to iterate and evolve that process. And I think this is a great example. So I was, as we were preparing for this webinar, I went back and took a look at some data to kind of try to figure out how to tell a story around that. And, again, sales is going to go in and say, hey, here are the accounts I want. And the reasoning behind that, hopefully they've profiled those, but sometimes it can be, I've sold to them before at previous companies, or I know how they operate, and these things that they know they might have a foot in the door. Doesn't necessarily mean they're in market to buy anything. And so, as I said, we look at our target account list and we build upon our ICP. So that's a pretty well-defined profile, and then we layer on intent on top of that so that we can get to the right size target account list and the right set of accounts based upon the size of our sales team, again, based upon those bookings. And so when I look at just the kind of all the accounts in our CRM system that aren't customers and aren't on our target account list, and compare the effectiveness of those across our funnel to our target account list, this is what this is really showing. This is a a screenshot from our Demandbase platform, so a little product-y here, but I think the message here is that, being able to measure those lists and really look at how they're performing in a simple, easy way is an important tool for an account-based marketer to have to be able to do that. And when you look at these numbers on the left, looking at our target account list versus other accounts in our CRM system, which aren't on the target account list, you can get a pretty quick picture of why it's important to focus on the target accounts and to think about really focusing on those that are in market now and being responsive to those, because we're going to see tremendous funnel performance across the board all the way down funnel as we focus on those accounts, and helps to make that picture or paint that picture. So as a marketer, if you have your sales team delivering you a target account list, that's okay, work off that. But you can also start to play with tools to look at what other types of target account lists could be performing better, right? Let me take their target account list and subdivide that by those who are showing good intent and those that are not, and show how they perform differently in the funnel. And then let's take that winning performance segment, which in theory would be the intent. How can we find more accounts that match that profile against our ICP to go after? Because that's where we're going to perform the best. So I think that's really the message that is the takeaway, and the data that we're using to build those target account lists is that it's got to be a good ICP as a foundation, but then we really need to layer intent on top of that to figure out the best accounts for now.
Awesome. So as we look, whether you're using intent or whether you're using some of the sales identified to figure out who you're targeting, the other next sort of phase challenge that we hear from companies is, okay, now I know who I want to be engaging, but how do I do it? How do I get them to respond, to click, to help get to the sales meetings? So the other area we looked at in the survey was where companies were currently, what was working, what was sort of their priorities going forward for engagement tactics. So when we asked which were the following channels are you using to engage your ABM account list, you can see that some of this is sort of the conventional email still being really prevalent. I think the conversations that I'm hearing from folks are people are trying to get beyond ABM. I think there's still kind of an over-reliance in B2B marketing in general around email, but as you're trying to get more targeted and relevant with your ABM strategy, I think that there's going to be some interesting shifts there. In-person events is definitely a core strategy around ABM, so this isn't a big surprise, but I think we might have been a little bit surprised to see just how high it was, at 75% we're using it, 20% we're planning to use, so it's definitely becoming a core competency around engagement. Very high percent, 86% that are either currently using account-based advertising or planning to use. So making sure you're in front of those accounts as you're trying to either get initially engaged or go through the conversion process. I know I want to talk to you a little bit more about outbound teleprospecting. I was a little surprised that it was only 60%, 21% planning to add it. So I'm not sure whether companies have kind of moved away from that or where we see that heading. And then 65% also using social media as a way to be out in front of accounts on a sort of a one-to-one basis. I mentioned teleprospecting, John. Advertising. Any of these? Any other thoughts you had on what was high or low, or how they align with what you're hearing and seeing in the market?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you, Andrew. I'm surprised to only see that 60% are using outbound teleprospecting. And conversely, roughly about the same 2/3 are only using account-based advertising. In a traditional ABM world, right, like account-based advertising is going to help you focus your digital budget on just the accounts that matter most. And even today, with, for example, with Demandbase, you can target those ads to the people showing the right kinds of intent in the company. So that's really great for creating awareness and kind of driving some of the traffic to your site, where maybe you're providing some sales intelligence, when the accounts are hitting your site, even if they're anonymous visitors from those companies and so forth, which then triggers the outbound teleprospecting activity. So that's, it's interesting to see the correlation, or at least the volume of responses is about the same. So maybe there's a correlation there as to, who's kind of got their ABM play starting to get dialed in. But, the main concept with account-based marketing is that we've identified the accounts that we think are the best probability of turning into customers and can get the most value out of our solutions. So we got to go after them. It's not that traditional demand gen game of waiting for them to come to us. fill out a form, raise the hand, and then we'll respond to them. We need to be proactive in going out to them. So, in-person events doesn't surprise me. We use tons of those, and whether that's at a national trade show level like the B2B Marketing Exchange, or at those small in-person events where we're doing like workshops in regional areas and things like that. Those tend to be great tools for engaging our target account list as well as our customers. So that doesn't surprise me, as well as the email as well. Seeing that all the way at the top, as we saw several slides ago about the technologies currently in use, marketing automation was number 2 there next to CRM. So I think as I talked about, some of the platforms and extending data across those platforms, a lot of marketers are using that, but as you said, Andrew, they're kind of thinking, well, should I be getting away from that? Is that still the right channel for me? They're obviously still using that, and that's where kind of bringing your ABM strategy and your ABM technologies into play with your existing tech stack, like your marketing automation tool, can really be important, and specifically thinking about how you kind of change the way it jumps into action when you have things like intent data in play. So when we think about marketing automation, typically what we're doing is kind of waiting for a form fill. We need a person in the database to take action. They can show up online, and we kind of have some anonymous visitor stuff, but we don't really know what's going on until they fill out that form and that data gets connected. But at that point, we can start to do things like launch nurture emails, or we can score them up and put them in sales' hands, or even launch like different types of advertising tools or things like that. Again, the challenge there is really that it's for known buyers, and as you can see in this representation, the majority of the journey is taking place long before they raise their hand. There's several different stats out there from different analyst firms, but it's anywhere from 60 to 75, 80% of that journey is taking place anonymously. So what intent does is really allows you to take a tool like marketing automation and move its functionality way up funnel. So now when we have intent signals that are coming into our marketing automation system, we can start to think about taking those actions much further. More likely than not, in an ABM strategy, you define the accounts, you have some level or baseline of database of contacts in your marketing automation system at those accounts. So whether it's that individual who's a known person interacting with your marketing automation system, hitting your website, or you're picking up some off-site intent somewhere else, you can start to kick marketing automation into gear and start those nurture programs, start thinking about scoring up those account audiences, or even launching some account-based advertising to those accounts to align with the messaging that you're using on your website, in your marketing automation communications, and things like that. So it really allows you to combine both the known and the anonymous buyer's journey and take action much sooner than you would traditionally with marketing automation. So that's an idea of where kind of bringing all that together and having that data integrated across different systems is really important. And again, back to the ABM ecosystem, one of the main values there is that there are all those pre-built integrations. You're not having to go out and do a lot of that yourself, or at least build those from scratch. They have those native integrations, and that's really key to not only being able to set this up and execute against it, but also think about how you're going to measure success and report that across different systems, which coincidentally, maybe not, is our next section here, Andrew.
Exactly. So we pipeline obviously was sort of the end game there. One of the things we've been talking about now for years with ABM is it really changes the way companies consider and measure success. So we've been talking about that conceptually in the first couple of years we did it. It was interesting this year that we got to look at how companies are defining success, what they're measuring. So when we asked how they're currently measuring their ABM efforts, you can see things at the top response being net new accounts engaged, so it's aligning with what we discussed earlier. It's moving away from leads and individual things to looking at the account level, number of qualified accounts to really make sure that they're engaging the right companies that sales are interested in. And then, much higher, more than half are looking specifically at contribution to pipeline, things like pipeline velocity, where ABM has had a significant impact, and then ultimately on win rates. So, John, I wanted to get your perspective on, is this moving in the right direction, or are companies now measuring what you see as sort of the right things here?
Yeah, I think they are. And when we were going over some of this data last week, Andrew, I was like, oh, it's so great to see all this. And now in the back of my head, I have a little voice saying, well, wait a minute, if they're measuring their ABM efforts, why aren't we seeing this at, 80, 90% or things like that? So, I think it demonstrates there's still a lot of nuance in companies as they're adopting these strategies and, how they're doing that. So, for example, contribution to pipeline. Some companies are directly measuring their ABM strategy by the pipeline that's created from it. Some work a little bit more as that influence or contribution to, when you think about true sales and marketing alignment, it's really we win if we hit our pipeline goal for the company, and it doesn't matter who generated it at the end of the day. And even in some situations, marketers are going to touch every account, maybe with some advertising or something like that. And so, they're going to influence everything and maybe have some direct attribution for some. So it's interesting as I work with customers and prospects to learn about the nuances of their organization in those metrics. But I do think these are all on the right path, right? Figuring out how many net new accounts are we getting to come engage with us, and thinking about the number of qualified. So not only getting them to us, but how many are kind of taking that next step. And then ultimately measuring how our strategy is performing against those deeper funnel metrics. Are we making deals go faster? Are we winning more deals per target account list or per campaign, or depending how you create that denominator for the win rate? I think it's really important to drill down, and those are the key factors and metrics we should all be looking at. But as we look at the previous two slides around marketing automation and email performance, or we think about website performance, there are other metrics up funnel, more campaign-based metrics that we still need to be measuring. We just don't necessarily report on those as the success of our ABM efforts. So I think when we look at those, it's just important to look at them through what I call the ABM lens. So an example, instead of just measuring traffic growth to your website, how much traffic from your target accounts is hitting your website? How frequently are they there? What percentage of your target accounts are spending time on your website? Those types of things. So you're looking at the right kinds of data, or the right segments of the data versus all of the traffic. We've seen at Demandbase that roughly about 20%, 18 to 20% of all B2B traffic is qualified. So that means 80 to 82% is unqualified. Therefore, if we're just measuring on all traffic, our data is really skewed and is diluted by a large sample set that really isn't relevant to what we're trying to accomplish. So I think when we talk about those kind of up-funnel metrics, it's also important to keep those in mind, but knowing these contributions are what are going to help us tell our story about how ABM is impacting the organization, and quantify that where other members of the organization, the sales team, the finance team, the executive leadership, really get what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah, great points. I think it's interesting, too, with the QC, your own internal slides and some of the results metrics you're looking at. I think that's ultimately where people are heading. The other thing we looked at was, obviously ABM has been in place now. We always want to monitor where people are seeing the biggest payoff. So this is interesting because it kind of, looks directly at when we looked at challenges. One of the top challenges is still around sales and marketing alignment, but it's also the top payoff. So I think, again, there's some nuance there of companies. It's not just, as I said earlier, that, our sales marketing agreement, but really making sure they're focused on the right things, right accounts, using the right data, that they're getting deeper to make sure that they're measuring things the same way. So I see that going to sort of another phase of sales and marketing alignment. I think more efficient use of marketing resources has been a big payoff that we consistently see. Stronger, more trust relationships. So again, when we look at sort of the customer lifetime value, I think we'll continue to see that being a big payoff of ABM, that you're not just sort of winning short-term deals, but accounts that you can grow over time. Some of the other things around conversion points and pipeline, around faster sales cycles, clearer path to ROI, better reporting potential, and more streamlined acquisition process. Anything and payoffs to these align, John, either on here that you would sort of expect to see?
I think these are really great examples. In our certification course, we talk about some specific kind of benefits and payoffs like this, and they all pretty much align here, maybe slightly different vernacular or something. But, I think to your point, it's when you really kind of get in this groove of ABM, the teams are working together, which means they're more efficient, which means you're getting better value for your spend, and just overall the funnel tends to perform better. At times it can jump the tracks a little, and what's key is that you have a framework and you can get it back on and go back to your basics, your fundamentals. It's kind of like sports. when the team's not doing exactly as it could, you can go back to how you were doing it, run those fundamental drills and rebuild from there. So I think having that framework allows you to continuously realize all of these benefits, whether they're at their foremost tilt in terms of those benefits, or you're kind of having to reset the baseline and rebuild again. These are all the things that account-based marketers and their organizations as a whole, really start to experience once they're deep into the strategy. So it's great to see that, the ways we had set out and kind of thought about it, or we're seeing that and hearing about that in the market.
Okay, great. Another thing we've been seeing over the years with ABM, and while it's becoming a fundamental practice, we think for all B2B marketers, it really doesn't replace sort of the need or the part of marketing that's really more broadly acquisition. Most of the folks I talk to are realizing they still need to kind of keep the demand generation engine running to identify companies or sectors they hadn't thought of, just going to be producing some sales pipeline that may go beyond their sort of targeted accounts. So when we asked that distinctly around how would you describe your overall marketing operations, 40% said they've actually integrated demand gen and ABM processes together. And we're seeing people borrow from, direct mail started to work really well in ABM, so they start to adopt some of that more broadly in acquisition. Things like events, some of the approaches they're taking with events, they try to roll into their broader acquisition strategy. So we're definitely seeing where it's not an either or. And a different segment of folks that are prioritizing one or the other. But I think the takeaway for me going forward is companies are going to need to do both, and there's an opportunity to really get the best of both worlds. I think you guys even do some of that yourselves, John, and any perspective on where this is going in terms of a balance.
Yeah, I would caution to say that we do any traditional demand gen. My CMO might slap me on the wrist for saying something like that, which, in all truth, we don't really do that. But what I have seen across the market and working with several different customers is that, as you said, there's definitely a need for a blend, right? In B2B marketing, ABM is not the definitive be-all only way to do things. It is the right way to do things for the certain certain kinds of B2B marketing. So let me give you an example. If you're selling, let's say, like your staples, right, and you have, you're selling office printer and copy paper and things like that, those are very kind of transactional sales. You don't need to necessarily launch a big ABM effort and do all those things to have your customers come back and continue to buy, right? That can be more kind of a traditional demand gen approach because your cost of sales are a little bit lower. But when you're thinking about a complex sales cycle, many months, big tier products, big ticket products, that's where ABM really comes into play. So it's really important as a marketer and a marketing team to understand, those products that you sell and what your sales team has to do to sell those, and then applying the right kind of model, to that effort. And so we like to think about ABM in three different tiers, and you can kind of see the breakdown here of those, even on top of a demand generation model. So, for example, strategic ABM, that's probably the most commonly understood definition of ABM, and really the one that bore its fruit, back in the 90s, right? Thinking about big ticket deals, big strategic accounts, we need very specific campaigns for each account. Typically what you're looking at is a target account list size there of maybe 5, 10, 15, 25, maybe 50 at most. Then you start to think about one to few, and this is where you're working with sets of, maybe 50, 100, 200, 500 accounts that all kind of have a similar goal, a similar commonality between them that you're going to launch, bespoke campaigns to, and think about, this might be your direct mail campaign, or this might be a product upsell campaign or something like that. And then ABM at scale is really where you're thinking about that the rest of your target account list, or even potentially other accounts that aren't quite on it yet, and thinking, okay, let's make sure there's kind of some always-on campaigns for these accounts, be that targeted advertising, website personalization. Maybe think about how to target them with events or webinars like this or things like that, where you kind of have coverage for all of those accounts, and you're waiting for them to kind of show some buying signals to come in market where you would up-level them to a one-to-few campaign. And then traditional demand gen, right? So maybe we're Staples, and you can buy your office toner and copy paper, but we also sell these big printers, that are $100,000 or whatever. Well, we might use ABM to go sell those printers, and then we might use a more traditional demand gen approach to sell the toner and the paper and things like that to businesses who don't own those big printers, right? We could kind of have some SEM or some email marketing or something like that helps to kind of have a larger reach to a much larger set of accounts, but the ticket values are so low we can't justify direct mails and in-person events and all those types of things. So nor can we justify a high investment in things like personalization. So you really find in that demand gen you lose a lot of that personalization, and you're not investing as much per account. Whereas in ABM, those become really critical factors as you're trying to demonstrate your confidence to those specific accounts. So another example I've seen is where our customers actually have a B2B side of the business and a B2C side of the business. And the B2C side is this robust, really brand-centric, experiential, these types of things. And then what they're doing on the B2B side is they're mining people in there to say, do any of these people work at our target accounts? And if so, how do we take that intelligence, that activity, and then use it on the B2B side to start to generate revenue? So there's even scenarios in businesses where they have B2C and ABM and traditional demand gen kind of all running at once. And it's about understanding, your business, your objectives, the products that you sell, and applying the right marketing strategy to those. So we see a lot of this blend out in the market today. And, again, we're obviously huge advocates of ABM, but it's not always the right tool. You really have to dive in and understand the marketing strategy and the best way to make it effective.
Great. So the other thing, as we look at ABM, maybe maturing and becoming part of the core strategy, but also, part of an overall strategy, one of the things that we looked at and we see in conversations we have with marketers out there is, I think there's a realization that, okay, we might not have the people, the skill sets internally to do everything we need to do to be really targeted on specific accounts, to be talking to people, even maybe to use the technology. So one of the things that we looked at and we're seeing more conversations around is just where you might need services and support. So one of the questions was, in terms of you've already used or plan to use an agency or consulting partner to support your ABM efforts. Developing content was the top one, and we just saw that come up as a challenge, that as companies try to get more specific, targeted, relevant to specific targets, sectors, that they need to build more specific content, maybe more versions of content, so that they likely need agency partners there. Pretty high, more than a quarter of folks said that they just want help with setting their overall ABM strategy. So it could be a different type of consulting partner. Help with a quarter said they need help with designing their creative and campaign teams. So again, it can be a specific, more targeted approach, and how do you do that might be different than you're used to doing as an organization. 23% just said they need help with overall ABM execution, and 16% said that, go back to our conversation around account selection, prioritization, getting into the right context. So I think we're seeing a growing realization that we probably need some outside help. And the good news is, John, I think that we're seeing that the outside expertise and help options are starting to grow as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Andrew, because businesses have always used agencies to help support a lot of these needs, right? Content assets, creative themes, planning, those types of things. It's in the ABM world where that hasn't really been the reality for them until maybe the last couple of years. And we actually found that as we were growing our ABM practice and our business, there were a lot of agencies out there who were working with our customers, and we found that they needed to be educated just as the customers did on what ABM means and how to think about it, because they're reporting metrics that they've always been trained to report. But we were kind of saying, maybe that's not the right kind of stuff for us to be focusing on now. Part of our efforts to bring those agencies into the fold, along with the technology portion of our ABM ecosystem, we just announced the service partner providers portion of that last week. And what you can see is this is a list of globally recognized agencies that are now kind of on board with this. So as I mentioned, historically, they were a little bit of a friction point for us when we were working deals, and the agency's telling us one thing, and you guys are telling us this other. And what we had to do was really make sure that the agencies got it and that they figured that out. So we had some agency kind of education programs and things like that we ran for a couple of years. And now what's happening is the agencies are coming to us and saying, oh, we totally get where you're going, and our clients are going there too. How do we help do this together? How do we help support your clients? How do we make all of that work? And so this is where all these agencies have come into the fold, and they get ABM. They get how it impacts their customers and what they can now do to help their customers be more successful and plan programs that deliver that for them. Obviously, a key component of any agency, right? Agency client turnover can be very high. So if you're not delivering value to your customers, they're going to go find another agency that will. So by being a part of this ecosystem, we're seeing some of these, again, these big world-renowned agencies really get it and step up to the plate and say, okay, we're going to change the way we're working with our B2B clients to make sure we can deliver on their expectations. And so no longer the days of, agency versus strategy. They're all on board with this. And as marketers, we have access to tons of these agencies that can now help us fulfill on that vision.
Okay, awesome. We've covered, I want to remind everybody that if you have questions, to type them in. We have a couple minutes left to get to them. If we don't get to your questions, I'll either follow up or ask John to follow up with you directly. John, we had a question come in from Lori. She asked if you could expand on intent. She said they originally looked at in her organization just for sales to see about identifying some companies they may not be aware of in market, but she's asking about other ways that they could or should be thinking about it for different strategies and goals around ABM.
Yeah, so I think intent tends to be the first stopping point on the train to intent land. Sorry, really bad metaphor. But it tends to be kind of the first place that the marketers turn to, and that's rightfully so. But it becomes so much more valuable during other parts of the funnel to help improve its performance. For example, we think about advertising, display advertising. Account-based advertising has been around for several years now. Many years, in fact, but thinking about how we target the buying team in those accounts with intent is a more relatively new development. Historically, marketers would look at, persona, lookalike, and those types of things, which can be misleading. And even if you're trying to match your first-party data to a system, there's a huge drop-off in that match rate, which means you have the ability to target far fewer people, and that's just if you know who those people are in your system. What targeting with intent allows us to do is to actually go in and make sure that our ads are being prioritized to the individuals in the account who are showing the right intent. So, for example, Demandbase, if we're going after a company and we want to know, and we have, let's say, 4 or 5 of the key buying team members in our database, but we want to make sure we're hitting the entire team. We can make sure that maybe people in finance or procurement who are saying, what's this Demandbase ABM thing, and researching it online, are also seeing those ads and being prioritized because they are a member of that process, of that influencer team. And so making sure they're aware of who we are can be critical to keeping deals moving versus them saying, okay, let's stop, let's go have a meeting with them. I need to better understand why we're spending this money with them and so forth. They say, oh, yeah, that's that. You're doing this. Okay, I got it. Okay, great. I'm not a blocker. It also comes into when you're thinking about how, as I mentioned earlier, prioritizing your different campaigns. So as you're kind of looking for those signals from your target accounts to then prioritize to other things like direct mail. Let's say you have a direct mail around your widget. You want to be targeting the accounts that are showing buying signals for that widget, whether that's on your website or off your website, which is a really critical part when we think about intent. Our marketing automation system can tell us when the known people are on our website, what product pages they're looking at. So of course we could do that. But the key, as we showed in that marketing automation example of how to move it up the funnel to that initial research, is that we can launch those proactive outbound campaigns to those accounts before they come to us. And intent can help us do that. As we talked about, the sales intelligence and the teleprospecting element of an ABM strategy, that also means that the salespeople with the right access to that intelligence can jump into action before those companies start to react even to our marketing. Right, so as we're launching a direct mail piece, they might see the intent and start calling on that company as well. And that 1-2 punch of a direct mail piece and a salesperson being there adding value to their process is a really great way to get them engaged in a sales conversation. And back to our kind of attribution challenges. In that scenario, we don't want to be, oh, sales did it, oh, marketing did it. We want to say we did it, right? And that's that alignment and that attribution metric or attribution elements that come together. You know, was it the salesperson? Was it the intent? Was it the direct mail piece? You know, relevant insights to consider, but what's important is that we got into that account and we generated a sales opportunity. So, you know, as we focus on that, it starts to solve a lot of those other things about, you know, who gets credit for the deal and why do we choose this account and what campaigns should we put in front of them. Intent really becomes an integral, you know, part across the entire funnel.
Great. We had a question about account-based advertising from Adam. He said he's wondering if he should just be advertising to his top-tier accounts, and also if he should be just advertising as sort of an initial engagement strategy or trying to help with conversions on known accounts.
Yeah, so some of that will depend upon two main factors. One is your available budget for going after all the accounts and the size of the account list you're going after. And then two is the messaging strategy and how you plan to use your awareness efforts. So first and foremost, right, if you have 5,000 target accounts on your list, it's probably safe to assume you're not going to be able to advertise equally to all of them. So identifying some of those intent signals can be really key to helping you prioritize which ones you're going to go after now. You might take a set of accounts that are showing intent but are not on your website and say, we got to get these to come to us, and so that could be a good segment. Likewise, you might be thinking about customers and saying, you know, which customers are showing intent for these new products that we just brought to market. Let's make them aware of those products and why they should be looking at us for that, so they come renewal time or upsell time, they're aware. It makes our account management team's job much easier. So it's really about where you're applying the right tool for the right job. And there are many scenarios in between that, whether you're talking about, you know, funnel impact or funnel acceleration, or even that conversion element, you know, bringing the account from an initial point of awareness to how do we get them into sales' hands. You know, it can be used effectively everywhere. I think the key factors, again, are the size of the account list you're working with and what type of budget you have to put against those.
Awesome. All right, we only have about 2 minutes left, but I want to get one more question in. Alyssa asked about tactics, and it's kind of a broad question. We've talked about events a little bit in the research, content marketing. Any examples or best practice you could share quickly, John, around tactics you're seeing work or recommendations you're making to clients and partners?
Yeah, you know, tactics, in an ABM world, you're not necessarily going to change all of your tactics, right? Webinars still work, email is still an effective tool, events can still work, direct mail is a great resource we've been doing and had a lot of success with. What's going to change, as I mentioned earlier, is that lens. How do you focus those efforts on the specific target accounts you're going after and measure its impact against those target accounts? With that lens in place, that's how you're going to be able to evaluate which programs are working best, which are not, and start to adjust your tactical plans and your resource investments accordingly. So, you know, there's probably some that you might pull back a little, be a little bit more defensive strategy, like a search engine marketing. That's not a proactive strategy, that's a reactive strategy. So you might kind of pull back and a little bit of the budget there and maybe reallocate it to another campaign. But again, the main idea is that you can really dive in and understand which campaigns and tactics are reaching your target accounts and driving the results you're going after, and then look at how you amplify those, and then if others are not working, how you either adjust to make them work or decide that maybe we should pull back on those.
Okay, awesome. We had a couple questions we didn't get to that are similar about the research. We'll definitely be sharing all of the research. I have a couple I can probably help with, and there's a couple that I'm going to steer John's way. So, John, I want to thank you for taking the time to break down some of this and sharing such great examples. Awesome as always.
Thanks, Andrew. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks, everybody, for attending. Keep an eye out for the full research. There's some findings we didn't get into today that hopefully you'll find beneficial. You'll also get a link to go back and review the recording of today's session and share it with your peers. So thanks again for attending, and keep an eye out for other future webinars and content coming up. So have a great day, everybody.